occasional poems are difficult because of, this, I think I sort of buy into this idea of poetry being emotion, deep emotion recollected after the event. And I think an occasional poem asks you to flip that. It sort of asks you to feel something about an event before it's happened. And for me, that tends to feel unnatural and is a bit of a challenge. Sometimes I do reveal personal information in a poem. I think part of what it makes it easy or possible to reveal something in a poem that I might not just tell someone in a conversation is, again, that idea that I don't think about the audience when I'm writing a poem. And so I don't really worry about how someone else might react or if someone else is going to feel uncomfortable about it. And so that's very freeing to me in a way that I wouldn't be freeing if I were just going to have a conversation with someone. And so much so, in fact, that, I've sort of come to terms with whatever I've put on the page, and then if I go to a reading and I read a poem, I've been surprised sometimes to look up and see someone getting teary over a poem. It's because I've sort of kind of had that emotional experience and gotten over it, and I'm just treating it as a poem and sort of, I'm not necessarily experiencing it as an event right then and there, but to see someone hearing the poem experiencing it as an event, well, in some ways that's very satisfying as a poet to see that it is having that impact on someone. I think the thing that I've learned recently or focused on recently that I'm trying to incorporate into my practice is this idea of poems being oral. I think I tend to rely sometimes too much on the page and forget about that as I'm writing. And I realize in poems that I admire how good they sound when I read them out loud. So for me, I really want to try and incorporate that sound side of things. And one thing I do there is I like to memorize poems that I admire, and then that is an oral performance. That is that very concrete reminder that these poems are oral, both the mouth and the ear, both spellings of oral experiences, and a reminder for me to think about that when I'm, if not writing, at least when I'm editing. They tend to be short. I don't tend to write longer than one-page poems. I think part of what draws me to poetry is its compression, and I really like how a poem can tell so much and so effectively in a really short space, and admire that in a great many, in the poems that I'm drawn to. That's what I admire, and so I look to try to achieve that same type of compression in what I write. I think if a new poet has to get just one thing right, it's learning to listen to herself. And I think that means listening to any advice you get with a big grain of salt. So anything that I might say may or may not be helpful to another poet. I think that's the hard thing about advice, is that ideally it's specific and tailored to the person you're giving it to. So I think the poet, a young poet, has to learn to trust herself. And it's a very hard thing to do, but I think it means finding the poets that you like to read, that you admire, learning what lessons you can from reading their own work, and somehow, though, evading being totally, just completely mimicking what you're reading. And it's all very difficult. I don't think there's any shortcut to figuring out, but it is somehow coming to trust your own judgment. And I think that's something that poets struggle with for a long time, or at least I know I struggle with that, is my own judgment. And I still like to turn to readers and folks in a workshop with me and say, well, is this good? Is it done? When really I think I should probably be asking myself those questions.